In Asphalt City, every streetlight listened. Cameras hung like iron fruit over cracked avenues, and every screen repeated the same promise: obedience is peace. But Loovees had learned the cost of peace. It was the silence after a neighbor disappeared. It was the ration stamp denied because his father had once spoken too loudly at the wrong checkpoint. So each night, while the towers pulsed blue above the smog, Loovees climbed the roof of Block 19 and watched the Capitol burn electricity it had stolen from everyone else. From that height, the city looked unbeatable. From that height, he made the mistake that would change everything. He decided it could fall. The first rebellion was not a bomb, not a gunshot, but a sentence. Loovees hijacked a government billboard and replaced the smiling chancellor with a single line in white letters: "They are afraid of you together." For 11 seconds the city saw it. For 11 seconds buses stopped, workers stared upward, and soldiers looked at one another instead of the crowd. Then the signal died. Drones swarmed the district. By dawn, the ministry had called the message a foreign cyber attack. But in market stalls and train tunnels people whispered a new name. They did not know his face. They only knew someone had broken the perfect wall. He escaped the first raid through the freight canals beneath Sector Glass, where he met Mira, a smuggler with oil on her hands and a laugh sharpened by bad luck. She did not ask if he was the billboard ghost. She only tossed him a respirator and said, "Keep up if you want to keep breathing." Mira moved contraband medicine, banned books, and once, with visible pride, an entire generator hidden inside funeral crates. She had no interest in ideals. Then she saw the bruises on the workers in District 4 and changed her mind. By sunrise, Loovees had gained a guide, an argument, and the first real friend of the war. Their second ally was harder to trust. Kellen worked in the Central Archives, a quiet analyst who looked made for shadows and dust. He arrived carrying sealed access keys and a map of the surveillance grid, then calmly admitted he had helped design part of it. Mira nearly threw him back into the rain, but Kellen had brought more than guilt. He brought proof that the government's food shortages were deliberate, engineered to punish neighborhoods marked disloyal. He also brought a warning. The Chancellor's inner circle was preparing a citywide compliance reset, a phrase that sounded technical until he explained it meant mass arrests before the Founding Day parade. The three of them found refuge in a ruined school beneath the elevated rail, where children of the disappeared had turned classrooms into workshops. There, an ex-teacher named Emma taught kids to repair radios, forge papers, and read history the ministry had erased. Loovees expected fear. Instead, he found discipline. Every wall carried hand-painted instructions. Boil water, protect names, share batteries, never travel alone. In that school, the rebellion stopped feeling like anger and became a living thing. Loovees spoke to the students one candlelit night and promised change. Emma corrected him afterward. "Do not promise change," she said. "Promise cost. That is the honest currency of freedom." The first cost came 3 nights later. To save a train of detainees bound for labor camps, the group sabotaged the rail controls. The plan worked until a patrol pinned their escape route. Emma stayed behind in the signal room, locking the glass doors from the inside while Loovees pounded on steel and begged her to open them. She smiled through the glass, calm as ever, and cut the line. The charges ignited beneath the tracks. The detainees escaped into the hills. The patrol did not. Neither did Emma. When dawn arrived, the city announced a terrorist attack. The rebellion buried its first elder and stopped calling itself temporary. Out of brief rose theater, Mira convinced Loovees that revolutions survive on symbols as much as supply lines, so they crafted a new persona: Saint Vale, a masked figure who appeared across hacked projections, abandoned rooftops, and pirated radio waves. Sometimes it was Loovees speaking. Sometimes it was Mira. Once it was a 12-year-old boy with a voice like thunder. The point was never identity. The point was multiplication. Soon Saint Vale was everywhere. The government was weakest inside factory speakers, on water towers, in military barracks where conscripts secretly replayed forbidden audio. The state hunted one rebel and found 100 reflections instead. During a raid on a data vault, Loovees discovered a prisoner he recognized: Joran, his childhood friend, presumed dead after being conscripted years earlier. Joran now wore a captain's insignia and a face that carried too much winter. He should have raised the alarm. Instead, he lowered his weapon and asked one question: "Did Emma die for this?" Loovees answered yes. Joran let them flee. Later that night he defected, bringing weapons manifests and access to armored depots. Yet he remained uneasy, speaking with the habits of someone who had survived by compromise. Mira distrusted him instantly. Loovees did not want to. That became dangerous. Founding Day approached like a blade polished in public. Kellen uncovered the Chancellor's plan. While fireworks and speeches distracted the city, a facial recognition sweep would flag tens of thousands for detention. The only way to stop it was to breach the Hall of Unity and destroy the core servers during the parade. It was almost impossible. Security rings, drone nests, biometric gates, layered kill zones. So naturally the rebellion said yes. In the nights before the operation, Loovees walked the hidden school and memorized every face sleeping on classroom floors. Each person trusted him to choose the impossible carefully. Leadership, he learned, was just fear that could speak clearly. On the eve of the assault, Kellen confessed something worse than treason. Years earlier, he had authored the predictive arrest model now used to condemn entire families. He had told himself he was building efficiency. The state had turned it into prophecy. Mira wanted him gone. Doran argued they still needed him. Loovees listened in silence, then handed Kellen Emma's wrench and told him he could earn another day by putting his own body where his algorithms had once been. Kellen agreed without bargaining. It was the first time the team understood that redemption, like revolt, is not a speech. It is a sequence of choices under pressure. The parade began with choreographed cheers and polished boots. Underneath it, the team moved through storm drains into the Hall of Unity. Doran forged clearance. Mira cut power loops. Kellen walked them through blind angles as if reciting a prayer he hoped might forgive him. Loovees reached the server chamber just as the biometric locks engaged early. Someone had leaked the route. Alarms erupted. Steel shutters descended. On the far side of the chamber glass, the Chancellor's security chief calmly applauded. He spoke through an intercom with cruel admiration. Every rebellion believes betrayal is an exception, never a budgeted line item. Then he ordered the chamber to flood with nerve gas. The traitor was not Doran, as Mira had feared. It was the signal path itself. Kellen realized the Ministry had planted a recursive tracker in the very access keys he had stolen, anticipating his guilt months before he acted on it. They had not merely watched descent. They had cultivated it, hoping to gather every serious threat in one room. The discovery shattered him for half a second. Then he laughed once, bitter and bright, and rerouted the chamber vents by hand. Toxic gas rolled into the security corridor instead. He held the override wheel in place until the gears stripped skin from his palms. He did not survive the countershock. With the chamber open, Doran led the charge toward the server spine. They almost reached it. Then snipers stitched fire through the atrium. Doran shoved Loovees behind a marble pillar and took the round meant for him. Blood spread dark over the captain's insignia he had never wanted. He pressed a detonator into Loovees' hand and whispered the depot codes, his final gift to a city he had once helped cage. Mira dragged Loovees forward while the servers hummed like trapped insects. There was no time for a last speech, no elegant goodbye, only work. Only grief deferred so the living could purchase another minute. Loovees destroyed the first server cluster with Doran's detonator, but the central array remained shielded. The only way to crash the compliance system entirely was to broadcast from the hall's main tower using a live biometric confession, one that exposed the state's own records to every screen in the city. Saint Veil would not be enough. The people needed a face. Mira understood before he spoke. If you do this, she said, there is no going underground again. Loovees took off the mask. For the first time, he stepped in front of the cameras as himself and spoke his name into the machinery that had spent years erasing it. Screens across asphalt flickered from parade banners to evidence, ration manipulation, forced disappearances, fabricated scarcity, lists of ministers profiting from districts they starved. Workers watched from assembly lines. Soldiers watched from transport trucks. Mothers watched from ration queues. The Chancellor appeared on a secondary feed, denouncing the broadcast as synthetic fraud, but his own signed orders rose behind him, page after page, impossible to silence. Then came the deeper wound. Among the files was proof that Loovees' father had not died in custody. He had lived for years as an unwilling engineer inside the northern prison grid. The government had kept him alive as leverage it never spent. Until now, everything changed in one sentence. Your father is alive. The tower around Loovees seemed to tilt. For years his rebellion had been built on grief. Now grief cracked open and revealed unfinished duty beneath it. Mira wanted to finish the haul. She was right. If they left the broadcast incomplete, the regime might recover. But the prison transport logs showed an extraction convoy already moving his father toward the military airfields. Loovees had to choose between the city and the man whose absence had made him who he was. No story warns you how cruel a true choice feels when both roads are moral and both are late. Loovees chose the city. He hated himself for it before the words even left his mouth. Mira did not argue. She only gripped his shoulder and said, then we end it so his survival means something. Together they overloaded the final array and released every prisoner registry in the network. Neighborhoods that had hidden in fear now knew exactly where their vanished people had gone. Across Ashfall, crowds surged toward checkpoints, archives, depots, and holding cells. The government could control a population kept ignorant. It could not control a city suddenly holding maps. The first barricades rose before the tower had finished burning. Yet endings rarely honor decisions. An intercepted channel revealed the airfield convoy delayed by worker sabotage. Mira shoved Loovees onto a commandeered bike and ordered him north while she coordinated the uprising below. The ride through Ashfall's industrial belt felt like cutting through a machine as it came apart. Sirens wailed in 3 directions. Factory workers hurled chains across roads. Conscripts abandoned vehicles and joined civilians at improvised barricades. At the airfield perimeter, Loovees reached the convoy just as the transport engines spun up. He found his father older, thinner, and furious not at being forgotten, but at the regime that had taught his son to expect loss as normal. Father and son barely had time to speak. Gunships approached from the eastern ridge. Escape on foot was impossible. Loovees' father, an engineer to the end, rerouted fuel lines beneath the runway while Loovees held the gate with a rifle he did not know he was tired of carrying. When the gunships descended, the runway erupted in a wall of fire that forced them upward and bought the rebels a narrow path into the freight marshes. The blast collapsed the old man's sheltering trench. Loovees dug until his hands bled, but the answer did not change. Freedom had returned his father only long enough to teach him how inheritance works. Weeks later, the Chancellor stood trial in a public rail depot converted into a civic court. Ashfall was not healed. Power grids still failed. Food still ran thin. Some districts demanded revenge. Others demanded elections before funerals were finished. Mira refused every offer of title. Kellen and Emma were memorialized in the school. Doran's insignia hung beside a list of the conscript dead. Loovees, now recognized everywhere, spoke less than before. People had once wanted a savior. What they needed now was maintenance, memory, and honest argument. Revolutions win the night dramatically. Mourning is won by people who keep showing up. On the first anniversary of the uprising, a sealed archive opened beneath the hall ruins. Inside was a contingency charter proving the Chancellor had never been the true apex of power. A consortium of private directors, invisible during the war, had financed both scarcity and reconstruction contracts for decades. Mira read the names and smiled without humor. So the monster had parents. Loovees stood at the new council balcony as sunlight crossed streets once ruled by curfew and understood the final truth. Justice is not a single victory but a discipline against new masks. He turned to the crowd, to his friends, to the unfinished city, and began again.